I was only 16 years old when I realized I could make the entire world stop with a single keystroke, but it wasn't until the night I watched a live digital feed of 1,000 people suffocating that I understood the true, terrifying weight of that power. Imagine standing in the pitch black of a rainy alleyway, huddled over a flickering screen, watching the digital heartbeat of 1,000 people fade like a dying candle, knowing that you are the only person on the planet with the keys to the cage keeping them alive while the authorities are too busy following red tape protocols to even realize there's a problem. Most people look at a computer screen and see data, numbers, and social media feeds, but that night, I saw lives, fragile, breathing human beings. And I had to decide right then and there if I was willing to become a federal criminal and a permanent fugitive just to be a hero that nobody would ever actually know existed. I watched the oxygen levels in the neonatal unit drop to 40% on my monitor, knowing that in exactly 6 minutes, those babies would be gone. And it would be my fault for being too afraid of a jail cell. Looking back at the wreckage of my life after that night, the way the sirens eventually caught up to me and the way my future was rewritten in an instant, I have to ask you straight to your face. If you had the skills to save thousands of strangers, but doing so meant you would lose your freedom, your identity, and your entire future, would you have pressed that enter key? Or would you have stayed in the shadows to save yourself? Tell me right now in the comments, because what I did next changed the course of medical history and put a target on my back that will never, ever go away. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand where I came from, or rather, the fact that I came from nowhere at all. I never had a home, at least not the kind you see in the movies with the warm lighting, the smell of cookies, and parents who ask how your day was. My parents were ghosts in my mind, names on a piece of paper in a dusty filing cabinet at the Department of Child Care. I was shuffled through the foster care system like a piece of unwanted mail, moving from one cold, overcrowded house to another before I could even learn the names of the streets I was living on. By the time I was 10, I had lived in 12 different zip codes. In those houses, I was invisible. I was the kid who sat in the corner, the one who didn't talk, the one who was always fine. But while the world ignored me, I was building a world of my own. My first computer wasn't a gift. It was a Frankenstein's monster I built from parts one scavenged from dumpsters behind electronics repair shops. I remember finding a discarded motherboard in a rain-soaked bin and spending 3 weeks drying it out with a hairdryer, just to see if I could make it pulse with life again. I learned to code by candlelight when my foster parents of the month would turn off the power as punishment for wasting electricity. I didn't have toys, I didn't have friends, and I didn't have a dog. I had C++, Python, and Linux kernels. By the time I was 12, I wasn't just playing video games. I was taking them apart, finding the exploits, and rewriting their core logic just to see how the developers thought. I realized early on that the world wasn't built on bricks and mortar, it was built on code. And code is flawed. Code is human. By 14, I had discovered the deep web. Not the scary version people talk about on the news to frighten parents, but the real architecture of the internet where the information flows raw and unfiltered. I became the Ghost, a nickname I earned in the hidden forums because I could slip into high-security servers, move through their data streams like a shadow, and vanish without leaving a single byte of evidence behind. I didn't do it for money, and I didn't do it to be mean. I did it because for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a voice. In the real world, I was just an orphan with holes in his shoes and a social worker who forgot my birthday, but in the digital world, I was a god. I could open doors, I could see secrets, and I could command machines. I spent my high school years sitting in the back of the class, pretending to take notes while I was actually mapping out the city's infrastructure. I knew the vulnerabilities of the power grid. I knew how the water treatment plants communicated with their satellite offices. And I knew that the local hospital's backup generators were controlled by an ancient industrial system that was held together by nothing more than digital duct tape and prayers. I watched the world through a lens of vulnerabilities, always wondering what would happen if someone less careful, or more malicious, than me decided to pull the thread. I spent hours analyzing the SCADA systems that run our subways and the IoT devices that monitor our heart rates. I saw a world that was terrifyingly fragile. A world that assumed everyone was playing by the rules, never realizing that the rules were written on a foundation of sand. That Tuesday started out like any other boring, gray afternoon in a city that didn't care I existed. I was sitting in the back corner of the public library, the only place where the Wi-Fi was fast enough to handle my encrypted tunnels, and the librarians left me alone as long as I didn't make noise. I had my custom-built rig, a beast of a laptop disguised in a beat-up, sticker-covered shell, hidden inside a messenger bag. The fans were whirring quietly, straining to keep the overclocked processor cool as I ran a routine health check on the city's emergency response network. It was a hobby of mine, a way to give back to a city that gave me nothing, finding holes and quietly patching them, or leaving digital notes for the admins to find. But then, at exactly 2:14 p.m., the screen turned a shade of crimson I had never seen before. A massive, multi-vector man-in-the-middle attack was unfolding in real time. This wasn't some amateur script kiddie trying to steal credit card numbers or change their grades. This was a sophisticated, state-level ransomware strike being executed by a professional syndicate known in the underground as the Void. These people were legends of the dark web, known for their scorched earth policy. They didn't just lock files, they destroyed them. I watched in absolute horror as the attack bypassed the primary firewalls of St. Jude's, the city's largest trauma center and home to the region's only advanced neonatal unit. The attackers weren't just asking for Bitcoin. They were executing a wipe and brick command. This meant they were systematically deleting the operating systems of the actual medical hardware. I saw the data packets hitting the ventilators in the ICU. I watched the telemetry for the neonatal incubators start to fluctuate. These machines rely on constant, millisecond perfect communication with a central server to regulate oxygen, temperature, and medicine dosages. The Void was cutting the throat of that communication. Within minutes, the screens in those rooms would go black. The oxygen would stop flowing. The temperature-controlled beds would grow cold. The surgical robots, currently inside patients on the operating tables, would freeze in place or worse malfunction. My heart was hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to call the police from a burner phone. But how do you explain to a bored, overworked 911 operator that a foreign hacking group is currently dismantling the medical cloud infrastructure of the entire tri-state area? I told her, people are going to die in 10 minutes, and she asked me for my name and address. When I refused, she told me to stop prank calling and threatened to send a patrol car to arrest me for misuse of emergency services. I realized then that the experts at the FBI's cyber task force wouldn't even see the breach for another hour because the Void was spoofing the status reports to make everything look normal on the official monitors. I was the only person in the entire world who was already inside the system, watching the murder happen in real time. But to stop it, I would have to launch a counterattack using federal server nodes as a bridge. Basically, I had to hack the government's own secure backbone to get the bandwidth and authority needed to override the hospital's locked gates. If I did nothing, I'd remain safe, invisible, and free, but I'd have the blood of thousands on my hands. I'd be just as guilty as the people pulling the trigger. I sat there staring at the flickering cursor, the blue light reflecting in my eyes, knowing that this was the moment that would define the rest of my life. To stop the Void, I would have to commit multiple felonies in a matter of seconds. I would have to leave a digital trail that would lead the feds straight to my chair in this library. So, that is the impossible situation I found myself in. And I had to make a choice between my own life and the lives of strangers who didn't even know my name. Before I tell you what happened when I finally hit that key and the chaos that followed, I want you to stop right now. Pause the video and go down to the comments. Tell me honestly, what would you have done if you were a 16-year-old kid with no family, no money, and no one to catch you? Would you have stayed quiet and safe, or would you have traded your future for the lives of people who would never even know you saved them? Type "I'd save them" or "I'd stay safe" in the comments right now. I'm waiting. I didn't wait for the logic to catch up with my fear. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling so hard I almost missed the home row of my keyboard, and I initiated a zero-day exploit. A flaw in the core internet protocol that I had discovered months ago and kept secret for an absolute emergency. I slammed into the hospital's frozen gates, breaking through the Void's encryption layers like a heavy-duty battering ram. I saw them. I actually saw their handles in the command line. They were in an encrypted IRC channel, laughing, posting screenshots of the rising pressure levels in the hospital's medical gas lines. They were treating human lives like a high score in a video game, joking about how much the insurance companies would pay to stop the leak. A cold, sharp rage took over me, replacing every ounce of fear. I didn't just block their access, I hunted them. I used the hospital's own backbone to trace their signal back through 7 layers of proxy servers in Eastern Europe. And then I did something that was considered digital suicide. I rewrote the ransomware's logic in midair, turning the virus into a vaccine. I sent a feedback loop that began frying their own hardware, melting their servers from the inside out by overloading their cooling units through a BIOS exploit. While their systems were screaming, I was simultaneously manually rebooting the hospital's life support systems. For the next 3 hours, it was a digital war of attrition. Every time they tried to shut down the power on the 4th floor, I was there to move the traffic to the backup grid. Every time they sent a wipe command to the nursery, I intercepted the packet, redirected it back to them, and deleted the source code. Sweat was pouring down my face, dripping onto my keyboard, and my vision was blurring from the intensity of the code scrolling past my eyes. I felt like I was holding a collapsing building up with nothing but my bare hands. I could hear the library's clock ticking. Each second represented a heartbeat I was fighting to keep. I saw the hospital's internal logs. Oxygen restored to NICU. Ventilator 402 online. Surgical Suite 3 stabilized. I was doing it. I was actually doing it. But I also saw something else on my second monitor. A traceroute command coming from an IP address belonging to the National Security Agency. They had felt the shiver I caused in the federal backbone. They were coming for me. My location was being triangulated. I had maybe 10 minutes before the physical world caught up to my digital one. At 3:14 a.m., I sent the final, crushing command that purged the void from the network entirely and locked the hospital's systems behind a 256-bit rotating encryption wall that even I wouldn't be able to break through again without a physical key. The lights in the hospital miles away flickered, stabilized, and stayed on. The ventilators kept pumping. The city stayed asleep, never knowing that a kid in a hoodie had just prevented the greatest tragedy in its history. The aftermath was exactly as brutal and swift as I had feared. I didn't even have time to pack my bag or wipe my prints from the library table. By the time I walked out of that library into the cool night air, the black SUVs were already pulling into the parking lot with their lights off. The feds had tracked the signature I left when I bypassed their servers. They didn't see a hero, they saw a threat. They tackled me to the pavement, my face pressed into the cold, wet asphalt, as they screamed about national security, industrial espionage, and cyberterrorism. I spent the next 48 hours in a windowless room, the kind you only see in spy movies, being interrogated by men in expensive suits who couldn't fathom how a foster kid with a scavenged laptop had done what their billion-dollar defense systems couldn't. They threatened me with 20 years in Leavenworth. They called me a clear and present danger. But then the tone of the room changed. The lead investigator, a man named Miller who had looked at me like I was scum for 2 days, walked in with a folder. He sat down, sighed, and showed me a photo of his own daughter. She had been in St. Jude's that night for a minor surgery, and she was one of the patients whose monitor had flatlined before I restored the power. He told me that while I had technically committed 14 federal felonies, the government wasn't interested in the public relations nightmare of locking up the teen who saved the city. They realized that if I hadn't intervened, the death toll would have been over 3,000 people. The hospital board was calling me a guardian angel. Even though they didn't know my name, the government gave me a choice, one that wasn't really a choice at all. I could go to a maximum security juvenile detention center until I was 21 and then transition to federal prison. Or I could join a classified division of the NSA's cybersecurity wing. I would live under a supervised program, my every move monitored, and I'd spend my days hunting the very monsters I fought that night. I chose the latter. I'm still a ghost in a way. I can't have social media. I can't tell my old foster siblings where I am, and I'm still technically a ward of the state under heavy guard. But I realized that night that being invisible isn't a curse if you're using the shadows to protect the people in the light. I lost my childhood, I lost my chance at a normal life, and I lost my freedom to walk down the street without a tail. But I found a purpose that matters. I learned that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. Sometimes you have to break the world just a little bit to keep it from falling apart entirely. I saved thousands of lives, and all it cost me was myself. Was it worth it? I look at the news every morning and see people walking into that hospital, and I know the answer. Like this video if you were on my side and think I made the right call. Subscribe for more stories from the edge of the digital world. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I want to know if you think the sacrifice was worth it, or if I should have just let the system fail. I'll see you all in the next story.